All right, let's talk about what makes CSS so essential. There are a couple of things that we're going to be covering during the process of teaching and learning CSS here. Um, some of these things are, selectors and properties. We're going to be talking about, how the browser understands and knows the HTML elements to style and the properties to apply to these elements. Okay, properties such as the color, the font size, the width, the height, and yeah, stuffs like that. We're going to be looking at cascading and inheritance. Well, CSS stands for cascading style sheet for a reason. Styles cascade down through the elements, and the properties can be inherited from parent elements. Okay, we're going to be covering the box model. Everything in CSS basically is boxed. Okay, we're going to be understanding the box model, and this is something really crucial. So we'll dive deep into the context, and we'll dive deep into making sure that we understand how this is expected to work, right, in practical. We're going to be looking at several layout techniques. We're going to be looking at flexbox. We're going to be looking at grid, right? These are very incredible and powerful responsive design patterns, right, when it comes to layout design with CSS. Okay, we're going to be speaking to responsive design, making our websites adapt to different screen sizes using media queries, right? And lastly, we're going to be speaking to animations and transitions in CSS. Okay. All right, so let's start off with selectors and properties. All right, so we're going to be looking at different types of selector. We should be looking at the universal selector. We should be looking at, the type selector, the class selector, the ID selector. These are the most popular options out there, but we're also going to go as far as discussing the attribute selector, descendant selector, the child selector pattern, right? Would look at, the general sibling selector, the adjacent sibling selector. Would look at the pseudo class selector and the pseudo element selectors. Okay, let's start off from the first one, which is the universal selector. All right, so this time around we're going to be styling right within our HTML page, right? We're going to be styling in here. We're just going to have a style just like this. Okay, so this is the style tag, and this is the second way to write your CSS styles, right? The first option was to do that using the link tag, right? This is the second option. And of course, the third option would be having your inline style, right? Where you can simply say style and you can change the color, for example, to yellow. You see, we have color yellow appear right here. Okay, we can change the color red. Let's do that properly. So red. Now you see we have red. Okay, blue. Now you see we have blue, right? And if I should take this off, I can of course style this just right here. Okay, so I can call the elements, right? And I can say color yellow, right? If I save this, now you see we have yellow. Let's start off by taking this off, right? Let's take that off, and we're simply going to have the background color in here. That should be within the body element here. So background color, let's do black again. All right. Okay, so now we are going to look at these selectors one after the other. Okay, so the first one is the universal selector. Now the universal selector basically targets all elements, right, in the HTML document. So this is an example. We're going to target all elements, and we simply want to give all elements a color of yellow. So basically it's going to focus on the fonts. By the way, we have yellow already, so let's try a different color this time. Let's use green yellow. Okay, so now you see we have been able to change that color right here. If we should put a different text, maybe like the p tag, right? So we can say hello world, I am a web developer, right? So you see that also has the green yellow color, right? If we change this to maybe red, you see it changes everything as well. So this is the universal selector. This is how it works, right? The next option here we have is the type selector. Now the type selector is also known as the tag or element selector, and that is what we use right here, to pick up this element and style this element, right? We're going to be trying the element selector this time around. Let us use the element selector for the p tag, right? So if I bring in the p tag right here, I can simply say color. Let's change that to white. So now that is white. And change the font size. can have like 28. Now this is font size 28. We can also set the font weight, right? So we have a bunch of properties we can set. You don't need to master all the properties. You can't do that. You can't practically do that right now. You use this over time, and you get to know the properties that work for which element, right? So that's how you get to learn about this. One thing I want you to understand for sure is when you use the element selector, it is going to select all the elements that has that specific type. Okay, so if we create new paragraphs, for example, we'll create a new paragraph that says maybe I am a lifelong learner. Okay, so we're still going to have that item show up here. I'm a lifelong learner, and this actually has the same property that we have assigned here. Okay, if I change this to 38, it is going to change alongside the first item. Okay, so that is simply how you use the element selector, right, or the tag selector or the type selector. Okay, now the next one we have is the class selector. Now the class selector, this is where you basically have to create a class name, right? Let's take this off. For a start, we'll go back to the default. Let's change this to white. Okay, so by default we have all the colored items, all the text, or any item that work with the color property. We're setting this to white. What we are going to do right now is to work with a class instead. Okay, so a class selector starts with the dot notation here, and we have the class. So the class can be let's call this text, right? So this is a class, and then you put in the open and close braces. So now we can add our style, and in order to use this style, you have to include it here as a class. So you see, I can basically append this as a class, right? It's going to affect this p item, but it doesn't affect this p item. Okay, so if I set the font size, for example, 45px, and I save, you see that this item has increased, but the other item did not increase, right? Because we're working with a class. I can also change the color. All right, so let's use green, yellow right here. So now you see we have the color changed. If I should include the same class here, so let's call this text as well. Now you see it affects that item as well. All right, this is how you work with the class selector. We're going to be having more examples in the future. For now, you just need to understand how it works exactly. Okay, so when using the class selector, you have to bring in class alongside with a value or the specific class that you have created. Now remember, the class would have the dot notation here. When using items like the body element, which are directly referencing the elements, you don't need to include dots. Always remember, this is your element selector or your tag selector or your type selector. This is the universal selector, and this is the class selector. In the next one, we're going to be looking at the ID selector. All right, so let us drop this to 25 for now. Okay, let us create let's call this ahref topuniverse.org/300 dev days. Okay, and we have top universe 300 dev days. Awesome. So now I have a link, right? We just created a link, and we want to use the ID selector to style this link. Okay, so I'm going to use the ID selector here. Let's just work with ID, and I'm going to call this link. Let's call this my link. Okay, all right, so now we have my link right there. I can simply take this off, or let's just create that underneath. So I'm going to use the ID selector. When working with the ID selector, it selects a specific element, right, with that specific ID attribute. Okay, so it is unique within the page, and of course you are expecting that this should be used mostly for elements that appear only once, right? And yeah, so now we're going to create that item. I would simply call this link. That's what we called it up there. Okay, and I can simply say background color. Let's just say the background color is 1E, 1E, 1E. Right, now I'm using an hexadecimal color, so I use the hash symbol here. Right, so we use the semicolon to close this specific line before we move on to the next line. Okay, so but for the last lines, you don't necessarily need that, but of course you can include it as well. Okay, if you have just a single line, then it's not compulsory. If you're going to be having multiple lines, then of course you have to include that. All right, so now we have background color. We're going to put in padding. We're going to talk about this shortly, right? Let's just say 10px, And we're going to have color. Let's use blue. Okay, let's see blue, violet. All right, now you see what we have. We're going to take off that underlining there. Let's call that text decoration, none, right? And finally, we're going to also apply, let's see, text transform. Okay, so for the text transform, we can simply make everything uppercase, lowercase, what have you. So yeah, but that's not necessary. Let's just put a border radius. Let's just use 50 px. All right, so that's just to make the border, the border radius curved, right? We're going to talk about this shortly. We're going to talk about some of these properties that I've applied. You're not expected to master all, right? You're going to watch me use some of them. You're going to also get resources and materials speaking to some of these properties, but you cannot learn all in a short period of time. It's something you learn over time, okay? So yeah, this is basically the ID selector. We have covered 4 major selectors in CSS. From the next video, we're also going to look at other selectors such as the attribute selector, the descendant selector, the child selector, the adjacent selector, the general sibling selector, the pseudo class selector, and as well as the pseudo element selectors. Thanks for watching, my friends. I'll see you in the next video.